Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla. Let's talk about the stock and just what is happening with the stock and what we can expect moving into next week. Obviously, next week is an absolutely crucial week with earnings, of course, being on, let me just double check. I'm pretty sure it's Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Tuesday. Obviously after the bell. So that's going to be, to say the least, pretty important. Let's just say that, right? And for obvious reasons, while the stock is in a free fall, people are extremely bearish heading into earnings. Pretty much everyone is expecting it to just tank after earnings, at which a point it seems like everyone's going to buy the dip post earnings drop because that's what everyone's expecting. So we'll see if that actually plays out. But regardless, a pretty critical moment coming up for Tesla here to potentially either reverse the trend or, well, continue the trend to the downside. So let's talk about it. Let's see what we can expect going into next week. Now, all that being said and done, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. And of course, my membership section on YouTube is live. The link is down below if you're interested for all my, for $2.99 for all my intraday updates, thoughts, posts, options flow, etc. on Tesla every single day the market is open and trading. I'm there posting, updating whenever there is something worth updating, essentially. Obviously. Anyways, jumping into it, Tesla closing the day just now, about 10 seconds ago, closing down about 2% on the day. Yet another red day. No surprise here, really, at 147 per share. Which on the bright side, though, we will say, thankfully, compared to the market, let's say, for instance, tech in this case, selling off substantially. QQQ selling off a pretty substantial amount over the past few days, which, of course, is definitely not helping Tesla in this case right now. Though, with that being said, Tesla has actually held surprisingly well the past 3 days of this massive sell. Let's take a look, actually. So for these 3 days, QQQ has dropped almost 5%, actually, right? So according to that, Tesla should be down about in the last 3 days, at least 10% in my opinion, right? Minimum 10% in the last 3 candles. So let's see, from here to here, it is about 7%. So Tesla is holding up, even though it may not feel like it, surprisingly decent, we'll say, relative to the market. So, and this is also with those downgrades that we had, that downgrade that we had here that made us, do that massive gap down. Who knows how maybe better it could have held up if that, downgrade didn't come in at that moment, right? So, overall, the point I'm trying to make here is Tesla is holding up respectably, we'll just say, somewhat respectably relative to the market, just completely, tanking, especially tech. I mean, you have NVIDIA down 10%, Netflix obviously on off of the earnings down almost 10%, and then Meta's down 4%, right? Even Amazon's down more than Tesla today. So, with all that being said and done, at least it could be worse. Let's just say that. Now, let's talk about the technicals, right? What does this mean? Moving into next week, like what can we expect? So the first and foremost, let's start off with the weekly, because we, of course, have now officially closed this week. Let's take a look at this weekly candle. And it's not the best looking weekly candle, really showing no signs of strength here, right? The only good thing is the fact that the volume is very average. Like if this volume was also extremely elevated, that could have been, even worse. So I guess that's the one silver lining, but overall it's just a flat red candle with hardly any dip buying towards the bottom. So we pretty much closed almost at the bottom of the week's trading range, if you will. So that's not good, right? That definitely shows some signs of weakness. We are breaking below this bottom channel, but again, with these channels, you always take them with a bit of grain of salt, right? But in this case, if you take it with whatever grain of salt you want, it is breaking down below. And again, not all channels are bad, right? Channels are good. Like for instance, an example of a channel that worked pretty darn well, that maybe avoided NVIDIA's pain here, is this red channel right here. It kept bouncing, and then it finally broke below, retested it, and then continued southwards. So, they're not bad. Don't get me wrong. I think channels are great, but I don't think they're the only thing that matters, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So going back to the weekly here, obviously we did officially close this weekly candle below the channel, but similar to what I have on the daily, right? Where, if a daily candle closes above or below a certain channel, for instance, like we did not too long ago over here, right? You have, a few days, like 2-3-ish day rule. And even here it wasn't enough since it was still a false breakout and we did pretty much collapse right back under and to the south side substantially. So, you want to be careful with these kind of breakouts sometimes, right? And same thing applies even on the weekly. Yes, we had a breakdown now officially on the weekly here, right? Even with this more lenient channel that I redrew, but there is, especially with earnings around the corner, a chance that this is still a false breakdown. Will it be? Nobody knows, but I'm just saying, usually when Tesla is looking too obviously bearish and too easily to short almost, and everyone is bearish, the stock likes to punish both bulls and bears when they're overly greedy. And right now the bears are definitely greedy, rightfully so, but just keep that in mind. Now, also we are closing below 150, which isn't great. This was that massive, good area of support over here on the 150s that we did close below now at 147, which isn't great as well, in my opinion. So, there are definitely some bearish signs here. However, with that being said, there's also some potential, bullish catalyst, if you will, right? We are, of course, on the weekly, this massive fair value gap right here, we are pretty much closing it almost to perfection, right? Like I said many times, these fair value gaps usually close about halfway. Usually you retrace back down to about halfway into them, and then you usually find a bid, usually find a bounce, right? We do have two more below us, but they're small, of course, not compared to this massive one that we have essentially more or less filled today. But, this could serve as at least some form of bounce. And, I'll talk about my bounce targets, and I'll talk about what I would like to see for Tesla to really start potentially reversing the trend and also signaling that the bottom may finally be in. We'll talk about that very soon. But let's continue with the weekly chart here. So we have those situations there, right? If I zoom out a little bit more, you can see, go right here, beautiful. And then you can see the volume is spiking, right? So you can see the volume over here on the right? The volume profile is spiking substantially, and we're entering right into it, right? We had some low volume here, especially between this kind of 160s down to pretty much this area we're at right now in the 140s, especially the low 140s. But we are having a pretty nice spike of volume all the way down here, most likely from this trading range that we had all the way on the left here back in 2020. And we're coming right back into that general range, which before, as you can see, as we traded sideways in it, acted as, of course, well, resistance. Now we're coming back down into it, and we'll see if we can really truly turn that into, well, support, right? It doesn't have to be at this perfect, situation at 150. That would be ideal, would have been made things a lot simpler. But, even just coming back into this overall, trading range that we had over here, again, coming down into it now, should in theory acted as a support. We'll see, of course. Obviously, earnings will pretty much decide whether that's the case or not. But this volume profile is an area that, can be a pretty good area to bounce off. Now, the second thing that I've been talking about for a while is, of course, this weekly trend line that we've been, bouncing off pretty well. We created back here, came down into it, created it over here, had a massive bounce, and now we're, just a few dollars away from really truly retesting this, right? Next week, this would be pretty much almost exactly 140 roughly. So, this would be a pretty darn good spot to really test and potentially find the bottom and potentially get a pretty sizable bounce from, right? This would be it. Now, people that might be questioning this kind of situation, like, oh, okay, well, I mean, what is this line? Like, I mean, maybe just, screw this line, you know what I mean? Or whatever. Well, here's a decent example of Starbucks. Same idea, right? Starbucks, obviously, not doing so well. I mean, better than Tesla, but still, selling off. But what did it do? Well, take this trend over here, combine it with this one that was over here, and look where it bounced, almost to absolute perfection. And I had this drawn before it actually even came down into here. I think I had it drawn back when it was still around 90. And look at this, an absolute beautiful perfection of a bounce, right? 2 weeks in a row, down the bottom here, and then a beautiful bounce. And this is kind of what I'm hoping to see on Tesla, right? This exact like scenario, situation, whatever. This is what I want to see on Tesla, right? Pretty much almost the exact same idea, right? Just on a bigger time scale, of course. But that's what I want to see on Tesla moving forward into next week off of earnings. So we'll see. Again, the thing with earnings is just because an earnings might be bad, it doesn't mean the stock has to sell off. Just as if an earnings is good, it doesn't mean a stock has to pump. Case in point, Netflix. Netflix crushed their earnings. Phenomenal earnings. They doubled the amount of subscribers or members or whatever that analysts expected. Like, or maybe it was an exact double, but it was pretty darn close to doubling. I think they were expecting like 4.5. Netflix came in with like 9, pretty much a double, right? But what did the stock do today? It dropped pretty much 10%. Why? I mean, they completely destroyed it because their guidance was a little bit weird for sure, but it also comes down to the fact that, well, the stock has been pumping substantially, and sometimes it's just a sell the news event regardless of how great the earnings have been. And sometimes this can be the case on the flip side, regardless of how potentially maybe not so great Tesla's earnings are probably going to be, right? It doesn't mean it has to continue selling off. Things can be a sell the rumor, buy the news sort of thing, you know what I mean, as opposed to buy the rumor, sell the news. So you have both cases that I can, of course, play hand in hand. I'm not saying this will happen on Tesla. I'm not trying to say that, for sure it's going to happen. Nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows for sure. But I definitely don't think, that that's an impossible thing to expect here, especially if Elon finally decides to give some at least decent guidance, especially around robotaxis and whatnot, and gives us some actual numbers and, less excuses, more just numbers, right? More just, I guess, confidence. That would be good to see, and I think the stock would react very positively towards that. So that's kind of the main thing I'm seeing on the weekly, right? The overall time frame. That's kind of the main stuff I'm seeing. Don't forget, the RSI is approaching one of the most oversold levels it's been in a while. Technically, there is still more to go. Ever since it's never really entered well into the 30s without finding a bounce almost instantly. The only time it's ever entered into the 30s was when the whole market was selling off and Elon was selling off, and we went to 100, and Tesla stock on the weekly chart RSI went to pretty much 27 before it found, obviously, as we know, a pretty substantial bounce, pretty darn quickly. Doesn't mean it has to happen this time, but we are, of course, once again approaching some quite oversold territories on the RSI, entering essentially historic levels of oversold territory on the RSI. As currently right now, it is pretty much sitting around 33. And again, anytime it's entered pretty much around the range of 30, maybe slightly below, but around 30, for instance, here, right, where it bounced at pretty much 30 on the dot, maybe just, yeah, pretty much 30 on the dot. Same thing over here, right? It's found sizable bounces not too long after. So again, I'm not trying to say the bottom is in. I'm not trying to, pump it or dump it or whatever. I'm just looking at facts. I'm just looking at stats. I'm just looking at historic performance. And I'm saying what I'm saying, right? Take it as you will. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, or you think it's hocus pocus, that is your decision to make. And our size of stochastic has been pretty much scraping the bottom of the barrel for weeks now. Again, same idea here. Doesn't usually do that for too long, and has been doing it for quite some time now. Pretty much almost as long as it was when Tesla was tanking to $100 and Elon was selling. We'll see. We'll see. I'm just a messenger. I'm just a messenger. That's all I am. I'm just saying what I'm seeing, right? We'll see what actually happens. But a lot of people are quite bearish. Now, the daily, of course, let's talk about very quickly, because the video has been already 10 minutes. What do we want to see for Tesla to really confirm the bottom, right? What can actually confirm the bottom for Tesla? What do I want to see to feel confident the bottom is either in or a damn good chance it's in, right? This is what I want to see. Obviously, the main thing I want to see is I want to see some form of bullish reaction into this, like, mid to low-ish, we'll say 140s, especially off this trend line. That's step number one. That's the quote-unquote easiest step. Step number two, that would make me more convinced the bottom is in. There's 3 total. Step number two, that would make me, exponentially more convinced the bottom is in, is breaking above 160. If we can break above 160, I'm pretty confident that the bottom, not confident just yet, but I'm more convinced that the bottom has a damn good chance of finally being in. But the thing, in my opinion, that would not necessarily seal the deal, because nothing is guaranteed, but make me very confident, like 90% that the bottom has officially been in, is a break above 183. Why? Simply because we have officially broken structure, right? So far, again, as I zoom out over here, let's go like this, right? Pretty much in this downtrend, and overall this downtrend really, but especially in this recent downtrend, let's just talk about it to make it simpler. We've been setting lower lows, lower highs every single time. And now we're doing it once again. And if we come back up to 160, we essentially are just following the same pattern where we make a lower low, come back to retest the previous support as now a fresh lower high. And then we go down, make a lower low, come back to retest the previous support that we had at 160 in this case. Most likely reject, that's a new fresh lower high, and we just continue that pattern until eventually it breaks. Eventually it will break. It's just a matter of when, not if. But it could also mean more pain ahead. But the main way I look at it is, if we can break above 160, we have officially now removed the possibility of, or lowered the chance of setting an obvious lower high. We are now slowly starting to break a bit of trend here. Cool. But the thing that really breaks the trend is making our way back above 180 in this case, and breaking this previous high or lower high. If we can break this previous lower high and set a fresh higher high somewhere within the 180 to 200 range, that to me is pretty darn bullish. That to me is breaking structure, breaking trend, and I think the bullish trend can finally begin. And I think we'll come up to this area of about 230s roughly for Tesla not too long after, honestly. And that's the main way I'll be looking at it for Tesla stock, to really determine that the bottom has been in. As of right now, we can obviously cannot say that the bottom is in. We can just be confident, or at least fairly optimistic, that if a bottom were to be set, this should be the area. But for true confirmation, that is what you would want to be seeing. Bullish reaction around 140, break above 160 and hold, and especially break above 180. That to me will tell me the bottom is most likely in. Very damn good chance. So that's the main thing I'm looking at right now, ladies and gentlemen. Options flow overall, pretty much everywhere across the board. Overall, Tesla is the most bullish flow. I mean, as hard as that might be to believe, it is the most bullish flow on the market today, apparently, with about 90 million in confirmed bullish flow, which is great. So clearly people are buying the dip on this weakness. Whales, maybe institutions, who knows? But all in all, there's been a lot of flow for Tesla around the board, right? We had, pretty much a million here for Tesla for next week in calls coming in, but we also had a pretty decent amount of puts coming in, 1.54 million in puts coming in for next week as well. So it doesn't seem like anyone knows where the hell it's going next week based on earnings. And I mean, that's just kind of how earnings usually are. So we'll see how this plays out. Again, remember, a bad earnings doesn't mean the stock drops, and a good earnings doesn't mean the stock pumps. It depends on what the stock has been doing leading up into that earnings. Case in point is Netflix. Again, absolute pump into the earnings. Earnings came out, phenomenal earnings, like truly, truly phenomenal earnings, like unbelievable earnings. But guidance was weird, and the stock has obviously been essentially a buy the rumor, sell the news event. We'll see if Tesla can do the opposite, regardless of how good or bad the earnings might be. But with all that being said and done, thank you so much for watching. Next week is a big week. Hope you're all ready. I'm ready. I'm excited. I'm anxious. And I just really want to see what happens. And I'm very curious. So with all that being said, thanks for watching. And I'll see you next week. Peace.